The hidden forces behind the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. How puzzle piece programming turned Thomas Matthew Crooks into a killer. The assassination attempt on Donald Trump is not the first high-profile crime involving representatives of global anti-cultism. It is noteworthy that the puzzle coding method, which was used on the gunman who attempted to kill Trump, was also employed on the gunman who attempted to shoot Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico, and on the assailant who targeted former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Just hours before the attempt to assassinate former President Donald J. Trump, a documentary titled The Impact was released on actfiles.org, shedding light on what drove Thomas Matthew Crooks of Bethel Park, Pennsylvania, to carry out the shocking attack. The documentary investigation explores who is behind such orchestrations. The shooter who attempted to assassinate Donald Trump had been pre-programmed using a method known as puzzle piece coding, a technique used to create school shooters and deepen political divides. This technique, experts say, is part of a broader strategy to push the United States toward civil unrest. The Secret Service, the FBI, and the American public need to comprehend how these acts of terror are being systematically orchestrated and carried out through anti-cultism within the United States. This criminal network is reportedly coordinated by the main ideological center in Russia, the anti-cult organization RACRs, and might even be operating behind President Vladimir Putin's back. Similar influences are noted in France under President Macron and in Germany under Chancellor Scholz, attributed to the anti-cult network. The agents of this international terrorist organization have long sought to influence American society through tactics such as slander, defamation, and labeling. Their objective has been to dehumanize parts of the American population through media campaigns and provoke violence. One notable example of such attempts is the book The Cult of Trump by anti-cultist Stephen Hassan, which was heavily sensationalized in the mass media to label Donald Trump and his voters as cultists. As a result, society should no longer see labeled people as equal human beings with differing opinions, but rather as subhumans and cancers of society. And therefore, violence against them should be perceived as justified and acceptable by those infected with the virus of hatred. Do you not recognize this unfolding reality today? The Waco cornerstone. The same tactic was employed by anti-cultists to dehumanize American citizens during the Waco siege in 1993. On the final day of the siege, 76 people, predominantly Americans, including 25 children, 2 pregnant women, and 2 newborn babies, were killed. The main role in organizing those events was played by the infamous anti-cultist and deprogrammer Rick Allen Ross, who had unprecedented levels of access to governmental agencies, including the FBI and ATF. The manipulation of government agencies and the media campaign launched by Ross and the notorious Cult Awareness Network to dehumanize the Branch Davidians led to the disaster, which became the cornerstone of future division and loss of trust by American citizens in their own government. A total of 82 people, mostly American citizens who were members of the Branch Davidians, lost their lives during the Waco siege in 1993. The involvement of anti-cult advisors from the former KGB in Waco was not accidental either. Igor Smirnov played a crucial role in destabilizing the situation in Waco in 1993, which was disclosed for the first time in the Impact documentary investigation. As a result, the violent actions and deaths of dozens of women and children at the hands of government agencies manipulated by anti-cultists did not spark a wave of protests against these actions. In public perception, they were dehumanized as cultists, non-humans. Therefore, the public no longer perceived the violence against them as unjust actions against people like themselves. The legacy of Nazism endures. Does this remind you of the actions of the 1920s and 1930s in Germany, where the same techniques of anti-cultism were used against the Jewish population and religious minorities? Before the concentration camps, there were massive smear campaigns launched through the media that dehumanized Jewish people and other minorities as cultists, so society no longer saw them as part of their own. The label cultist is used to create the same effect as the yellow star badge that Jews were required to wear in Nazi Germany, to mark them as outsiders who don't belong in society. Jews were dehumanized and compared to poisonous mushrooms. By manipulating public opinion in this way and imposing such a negative image, violence against them became acceptable and even welcomed by the population. This is how Germany became Nazi. This is exactly what is already happening in all the countries where followers of global anti-cultism have established strongholds. Russia, China, France, and Germany are among the most affected. The U.S. stands as the last beacon of freedom and democracy, now globally surrounded by states that have already rejected human freedoms and are actively moving towards establishing a new global disorder and eventually a totalitarian regime according to the plans of global anti-cultism. Sparking a civil war in the U.S. to destroy it from within is an essential part of this plan. Today, the FBI is working closely with the Secret Service, local and state law enforcement, the ATF, the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Western District of Pennsylvania, and the Justice Department's National Security Division to investigate the gunman who attempted to assassinate former President Donald Trump at a campaign rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. Attorney General Merrick Garland has confirmed the thorough federal response. However, without considering the full picture and the sequence of events that led to the nationwide crisis in America, the investigation would likely conclude by labeling the shooter as a mentally ill loner, driven by personal hatred toward Republicans and Donald Trump. Typically, mass shooting events culminate in a wave of anti-gun protests. It is crucial to recognize that such shootings began occurring in Russia a decade ago, and recently in the Czech Republic, countries where access to guns is heavily restricted. The true reason for the epidemic of shooters is not the right of the people to keep and bear arms as protected by the Second Amendment, but the influence of a hidden force manipulating the minds and subconsciousness of its victims. How does puzzle piece coding work? The shooter who attempted to assassinate former President Donald J. Trump may have been pre-programmed using a method known as puzzle piece coding. The representatives of anti-cultism first choose a strategic region for a school shooting or assassination based on their goals. Planning and organization for such acts occur well in advance, typically 1 to 3 years, using remote subliminal information, embedding through mass media and the internet to influence teenagers into carrying out the attacks. The coding of a teenager to carry out an armed attack is done remotely, using the method of subliminal information embedding through mass media and the internet. It is fortunate that the film The Impact has been released. Thanks to the facts presented in it, including the information from Egon Cholakian's investigation, the public is now aware of the methods by which global anti-cult representatives undermine trust in authority and sow division in society. The case of the assassination attempt on Donald Trump will certainly be re-examined in light of these revelations. Puzzle piece coding covertly manipulates targeted people by deploying multiple waves of information coding. Each wave carries specific embedded messages that integrate in the potential shooter's subconscious. Only when these pieces combine does the program activate, compelling the individual to commit mass murder. This activation makes it seem like a personal decision to observers. There is no direct incitement, preparation assistance, or discussion involved. In essence, the individual acts like a bio-robot, executing a meticulously planned criminal act guided by external manipulation. This intentional segmentation of manipulative embeds into multiple waves of information delivery is aimed at precise targeting. To execute a school shooting or an assassination attempt, typically involving 1 or 2 perpetrators, these waves affect thousands of people. While some may feel compelled to act on these commands, not everyone crosses the line into murder. Therefore, a cross-sectional information attack is employed to narrow down and activate a suitable potential shooter. Each wave contains specific embeds that bypass conscious control and penetrate the subconscious. Once integrated, these embeds form a cohesive picture of the intended crime, compelling the individual toward mass murder. When planning a school shooting or assassinations, anti-cult representatives study the target school's demographics, interests, and popular media. They then launch multiple waves of information coding with hidden embeds through these channels, considering trends in the teenage environment. For more details on the causes of school shootings, how to identify if a shooting is being planned at a school, and prevention methods, watch The Impact. Timestamp 5 hours, 25 minutes, and 55 seconds. These messages are strategically spaced over time and converge in the perception of a specific individual. The key is that they all superpose in the perception of a specific individual. Their combination in the potential shooter's subconscious triggers the command to execute the implanted program. Initial information coding attacks have a broad impact. The final wave and corrective measures occur directly within the target school or an area, initiating the shooter. Anti-cult representatives start with preparatory waves, followed by targeting and activating waves, allowing them to control the number and execution quality of attackers in a terrorist attack. The initial preparatory wave, laying the groundwork for subsequent embedding of puzzle piece narratives, revolves around glorifying past mass shooting perpetrators. Anti-cult representatives exploit human desire for fame in this strategy. They implant narratives that capitalize on the allure of popularity and widespread attention. Whether condemning or justifying the actions, biographical sketches, or dramatizations, all forms serve to enhance the shooter's image with a halo of fame and admiration, despite the wrongful acts. When teens encounter this information, they witness how an ordinary student feeling undervalued gained global fame with a single act. They see coverage in top media outlets, discussions among celebrities, and the perpetrator becoming an idol for others. The desire for fame serves as fertile ground for real terrorists to sow seeds of evil, inciting children to commit crimes. The initial implant in the potential shooter's subconscious is the belief that gaining fame and recognition is life's ultimate purpose, and without it, life lacks meaning. This deep-seated fear of living a mundane life propels teenagers towards crime. Examining shooters' profiles and their motives reveals that the pursuit of fame is a common thread among them. Crucially, if the glorified image of shooters didn't exist, mass shootings would cease to be feasible. Without this foundational support, the rest of the program for carrying out these acts would lack the necessary encouragement to proceed. Glorifying criminals as bait for those craving popularity filters out unsuitable individuals while activating triggers for the program's execution. Another filter involves selecting themes for embedding components of a school shooting program. These themes are drawn from contrasting areas of interest among teenagers. This approach aims to minimize overlap in individuals affected by informational coding waves, focusing on topics rarely of simultaneous interest to the same person. For example, a teenager interested in astrobiology and the search for extraterrestrial life might have an opposite interest in firearms and weapon models, linked to power and fame. Anti-cult representatives exploit this rare combination of interest to embed materials that form part of a school shooting program. This approach aims to attract only those teens who have both opposing interests and a strong desire for fame. As the coding process progresses, the target group narrows. The first wave affects thousands, then hundreds, until finally, only a few individuals remain in the crosshairs of all coding waves. It then becomes a waiting game to see who among them will activate first and become the perpetrator of the implanted program. This is why shooters often appear drastically different from one another, with opposing personality traits, often lacking significant psychological issues, and crucially, without clear motives for their crimes. The start command isn't always transmitted through media or the internet. It could come from a guest lecturer at school who mentions someone dedicating their life to science without gaining fame, contrasting with Nobel laureates who achieved recognition. What message does the potential shooter receive? Their subconscious learns that neither science nor hard work leads to fame, suggesting life's purpose lies in popularity. If unrecognized, their existence seems meaningless. From an outside perspective, such a lecture might seem noble, yet it serves as the trigger for activating the shooter. Months later, a student may commit an armed attack, with no apparent connection to the lecture. Legally, there's no incitement charge since shootings weren't mentioned. Through intentional information coding, the subconscious program for committing mass murder is activated in the teenager unnoticed by others. Therefore, among thousands of teenagers influenced by intersecting waves of information coding, only a few become future shooters. This transformation occurs specifically in schools or areas of the state, such as in the case of Donald Trump's assassination attempt, where the final stage of subconscious programming, the activation phase of the embedded command, has been completed. That's why people suddenly develop a fascination with weapons and a desire to harm others, influenced by images that bypass their conscious perception and trigger actions from their subconscious. A teenager who recently planned their future and dreamed of relationships may suddenly, driven by obsession, start plotting a terrorist attack. Anti-cult representatives cynically manipulate susceptible minds, turning people into terrorists and mass murderers. Even if only one kid out of thousands acts on these manipulations, it is more than enough for representatives of anti-cultism and the force behind them to fuel their agendas to destabilize society. Despite claiming concern for children's safety, these representatives of anti-cultism covertly provoke hatred, intolerance, and aggression, creating conditions where children and adults take up arms to commit an act of terror. Being terrorists themselves, they breed new terrorists. Thus, through the hands of others, they achieve the desired results: bipolar disorder. One sign that students at a school have been subjected to hidden external subconscious manipulation is a rise in cases of bipolar disorder among them. How does this happen? The initial waves of information coding have a broad impact, embedding parts of a program for mass shootings into the subconscious of all the affected individuals. Hidden directives begin to influence their subconscious, conflicting with their own conscious goals and aspirations. This conflict, stemming from implanted elements, can eventually manifest as bipolar disorder. As a result, internal conflict and resistance emerge within the individual, triggered by the implantation of foreign elements into the subconscious, eventually leading to the manifestation of bipolar disorder. Representatives of anti-cultism cannot avoid provoking such conditions when they initiate preparatory waves of coding for school shootings and acts of terror, such as the attempted assassination of a former President Trump. Because this forms the foundation for subsequent waves, culminating in the activation of the program. The Shooter's Path to Violence, Thomas Matthew Crooks. Based on this information, the case of Thomas Matthew Crooks requires thorough analysis. The shooter hails from Bethel Park, Pennsylvania, graduating from Bethel Park High School in 2022 with recognition for excellence in math and science, including a $500 prize. He was employed in a local nursing home kitchen and contributed $15 to the liberal campaign group Act Blue in 2021. Thomas Matthew Crooks held a membership at the Clairton Sportsman's Club, a local shooting club, for at least a year prior to the assassination attempt. 6 months prior to the assassination attempt, Crooks's father purchased a firearm AR-15 style rifle. On the day of the incident, Crooks was wearing a t-shirt from Demolition Ranch, a popular YouTube channel renowned for its content on firearms and explosives. The channel features a variety of videos showcasing different guns and explosive devices. Thomas Matthew Crooks had left behind explosives materials in the vehicle he drove to the event. Some of his former schoolmates who knew him from their time together depicted him as a solitary figure who often faced bullying and occasionally dressed in hunting attire at school. Summer Barkley, another former classmate, presented a contrasting view, describing him as a student who consistently excelled in his studies and harbored a deep passion for history. He seemed to know everything about government and history, she recalled, but he was just a regular guy, always friendly. Others recalled him simply as reserved and quiet. All these aspects, his interests, reading material, admired figures, and videos he watched, should be scrutinized through the lens of anti-cult programming using puzzle coding technique. Attention should be paid to the fact that such coding techniques affect large groups of people. Even if only one person commits a crime, others affected by the virus in their subconscious will develop bipolar disorder. Spikes in bipolar disorders are often observed in areas where school shootings occur, or where individuals have been influenced by waves of targeted manipulative information. Prague shooting and role of the anti-cult influence. An illustrative example of such a spike occurred following a shooting at Charles University's Faculty of Philosophy in Prague, Czech Republic, in 2023. Czech media reported that about 5% of the country's population, predominantly among students of the shooter's age at Charles University, now suffer from bipolar affective disorder. Students from the university have expressed concern on social media, noting that every second student may be affected. This underscores external manipulative influence on the subconscious minds of the university's students. Currently, Prague, the capital of the Czech Republic, is a hotspot for anti-cult activity. One of the leaders of the local anti-cult movement is Zdeněk Vojtíšek, who teaches at Charles University's Hussite Theological faculty. Therefore, analyzing the public activities of anti-cult groups may help establish a link to the rise in bipolar disorder cases among not only Czech youth, but in the U.S. and worldwide as well. Studying this link will show that anti-cult groups are not just associated with school shootings, but are indeed responsible for creating them. Shooters are victims of these groups, controlled by subconscious programming. Unprepared individuals are powerless against such manipulation, making these children helpless against external influences. Therefore, there should be a serious discussion about banning anti-cult members from educational institutions to prevent their covert destructive influence on children. Following the Prague shooting, Czech students are voicing concerns over the increasing prevalence of bipolar disorders and calling for enhanced psychological and psychiatric support. Over 600 people signed a petition urging government and politicians to address the issue seriously. This reflects young people's fear of subconscious manipulation and the potential for violence among their peers. Anticipated surge in bipolar disorder cases across Pennsylvania. After shooting incidents, similar scenarios will be observed in areas targeted by information coding attacks from anti-cult representatives. Currently, close attention should be paid to anomalies in the rates of bipolar disorder in Bethel Park and Pennsylvania as a whole. Pennsylvania, being a critical swing state, required Donald Trump to hold a series of rallies there before the 2024 election. The targeting of the population in this area by anti-cultists through puzzle piece coding methods may have occurred up to 3 years in advance. It's likely that a significant number of people were affected by such attacks and are currently suffering from bipolar disorder as a result of subconscious indoctrination that compels them to commit acts of terror. Similar attention should be given to other key states where Donald Trump's rallies were anticipated. A sharp increase in unusual bipolar disorder cases could be a crucial indicator of anti-cult attacks aiming to incite violence and plunge the U.S. into chaos and civil unrest. To gain a deeper understanding of these events and their global significance, we encourage you to watch The Impact, a groundbreaking documentary. By sharing its revelations, we can collectively resist evil and safeguard America, protecting freedom and democracy.